So, early ideas about atoms. So, Leucippus and Democritus lived back in the 4th and 5th centuries BC, and they were the first people to propose that that matter was composed of atoms, small indestructible particles, and they gave them the name. They used the word atomos. Democritus wrote, "Nothing exists except atoms and empty space. Everything else is opinion." They proposed that there were many different kinds of atoms and that they were each different in shape and size, and they moved randomly through empty space. These guys lived hundreds of years BC, okay? The wheel had been invented, right? But we had not discovered America. There was no electricity. I mean, we're talking very, very primitive times. And these guys were philosophers. They thought about, well, what is this stuff? Dirt. What is dirt made out of, right? So they came up with these ideas. Have you ever heard of Leucippus or Democritus? Well, if you've read this book before, you have, but most people have never heard of them. Have you heard of Plato? Yeah. How about Aristotle? Yeah, so those guys were a lot more popular. They were a lot more popular in their day, and they didn't hold with this idea. They said, no, matter has no smallest parts. It's infinitely divisible. You could just keep cutting it forever. The different substances are made up of only 4 elements: fire, air, earth, and water. And they're just different proportions of those 4 elements. Well, there was no way to test these ideas back then. And so it just went basically on popularity. So Aristotle was more influential, and so people followed him, and science was set back 2,000 years. Who knows what would have happened if Aristotle hadn't led people astray. So later, the scientific approach, the scientific method became the established method of learning about the physical world. And that has to do with the scientific method and having a hypothesis and then testing the hypothesis. So an English chemist, John Dalton, he lived in the late 1700s and early 1800s. He offered convincing proof that those early atomic ideas were actually correct. So he had ideas and some evidence, but there wasn't an official consensus until 1905. And that's when Einstein came out with his theory.